Let me see. All right, so we are live, and I'm going to share. Doo-doo-doo. Okie dokie. Go to the comment area before I press the thing here. All right, guys. So if anyone pops up while we're sitting up here sharing this lovely information, just bear with us for a couple of minutes. You know how Facebook is, and if you don't mind sharing, hey, please do so. Okie dokie. Just that one share. I think I'm limited to 3 shares, and then that's when all heck break loose.
Okay.
Yeah, then Facebook want to police me. Let's see. Okay. Group. All right. Share. Oh no, I don't want to do that. Let's see. It's not allowing me to do. Oh, Messenger. Okay, there we go. There, there. That person. There we go. That person. Oh, that person more than once. Let's see. All right, yeah, like that. All right. So, all right, guys. Thank you for tuning in to. It's actually not the beginning of the season. It's a precursor to the season. The season starts. The social starts next Wednesday, which is going to be a doozy. It's actually a two-parter. So if you haven't tuned in to our podcast, the first part of next week's episode is going to be on our podcast. Um, Hello, good evening. So, my name is LaRon Williams, and this is the sofa. As you can see, I am on the sofa. Real talk, where we talk about real things, grown up things. So, if your kids are around, you might want to put them to bed, unless they're maybe 18, 19, 17, maybe can get away with it, just depending on how you feel about some of the stuff, topics, or whatnot. But I have my lovely guest today, which she's been on several times, and she's becoming a frequent flyer. She's building up on miles. Miss Evelyn, please introduce yourself. And
It is such a pleasure to be back with you. Hi, everyone. If you've tuned into the podcast before, I am Evelyn Whitney, author of the book Truth Speak: Some Real Reasons That Men and Women Don't Communicate.
awesome. And basically, we're going to have episodes throughout the season with her. Me and my baby have the book, and every chapter, once we're done with the chapter, we're going to bring her back on to talk about the chapter. So in the description on the live, you will see her link to her web page where you can go get the book if you're definitely interested in buying the book. It is a great read. And so this is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Evelyn, that is true point of it is about communication and how we communicate, right?
Yes, that is absolutely correct. And many of the people who read this book, they're somewhat looking for relationship advice, relationship tips, relationship tactics. And there are plenty of them within the content. But the crux of it is communication. If you become a better communicator, every single one of your relationships will improve. That includes the interpersonal relationships with your significant other, your spouse. That includes relationships with your children, with your coworkers, with your friends, and even with yourself at some capacity. So
Okay.
we are dealing specifically with communication between men and women, but you can't really separate that out from interpersonal relationships.
You know, and with you saying that, it's like I had wrote something down. It said there has been a particular part of life that is being pushed to the side more and more as the years go by, and that part of life we speak of is communication. You know, even though it is needed and used frequently, the truth um, form of it is becoming obsolete. Can you agree with that?
Hmm. I cannot agree that it's becoming obsolete, but here is
Okay.
my take on how communication has a standing in current societal applications. Many people say that communication is key, communication is important, communication is essential, but they never do anything to improve their communication skills.
Hmm.
Why is that? Communication is often considered very abstract in the ways that it can be applied. So, because it's so abstract, people feel like because they've gotten where they are with what they know, then what they know must be good enough. And it's not. That explains why so many people talk about the value of communication, but they really don't do anything to move forward in improving their communication skills. They feel like what they have, where they got it, is good enough. And then they don't understand why they have problems in their relationships, in their communication efforts, and in the daily life that they try to live while they talk about how important communication is.
Okay. I can see that.
So, communication at its basis will never be obsolete. But I do think that people are becoming less and less aware of how important it is to communicate, to improve those skills, but more and more conscious of how much improvement is needed. So eventually there's going to be a culmination of these two facts where they're talking about how communication is important, but they're not doing anything. And then they consistently feel themselves lacking in areas where improved communication would certainly benefit. They're going to come to their own head about that. And then that's when they're going to recognize that they need to improve their skills, and where they've gotten with what they have hasn't been enough.
And I can definitely agree with that due to like that's something that was extremely lacking in my I can't even just say my previous marriage. It's just previous relationships altogether. Communication for me sucked. It one uh my my speech was off, so I was kind of scared to talk and express myself, and I always find myself with women that were overbearing, and they kind of talked down, so kind of had my tail between my legs a couple times. So yeah, I can definitely see where the communication for me, and I had to go out and learn and read up on different stuff. Counseling helped. Something that me and Lisa was talking about earlier. Um, I had to recognize what those previous relationships did to me so that I could communicate better with the person that I am with now.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And
Brian says also depends on how communication was modeled from them growing up, and that's pretty much what I was kind of stating, Brian. Definitely, the communication with my parents is like so. I didn't have anything to learn from.
okay. Well, do we? The topic that we were talking about specifically tonight is miscommunication. And we understand miscommunication to be instances where a thought was not transmitted the way that we wanted it to, or that we received something that the speaker wasn't intentionally saying. But in order to get to the expanded problems that cause miscommunication, we have to
Uh-huh.
unpack what communication in and of itself really is.
Okay.
And I'd like to share my screen, if I may, for a moment, just for a presentation that I have to share with all of us tonight on the topic of miscommunication.
Yes, ma'am. All right, excuse the loud cars in the background. For some reason, these folks tune up their cars to make all this loud noise on purpose.
Okay.
All right, here we go.
So here we are. We're dealing with miscommunication. And all of these principles that we've talked about, that we will talk about tonight, will be explored further and explained more thoroughly in the book. If you have any questions, please chat them in so we can answer them as we go. And this is interactive, so we can still continue the discussion as the presentation goes through. For me personally, this quote is very, very important. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it's taken place. Normally, that tends to happen when you've had a conversation with someone. You're convinced that they heard what you intended to say, and it isn't until sometime later that you recognize they could not have understood what you meant if they behave in certain ways that reflect the absolute opposite of what you said. So while you were speaking to that person, you believed that they heard you, because the illusion that communication is taking place is a huge problem.
You know, that's many moments where I've used my communication text wise, and it didn't go out the way that it should have went out, and I've had to go back and be like, no, you misunderstood what I was saying.
That is absolutely, yep, that happens very, very often. And in the book, we begin with what I call the Adam and Eve premise. Now, most people know who Adam and Eve are. They are the first two humans who were created in the Bible. You don't have to be a Christian to understand what I'm about to present to you, but if you are, that can help structure these premises. Number one, we're looking at Adam and Eve, and we know that as the first human beings created, they weren't created as babies. They were created as full-grown adults, which means they didn't have dysfunctional parents to contaminate the way that they grew up. They didn't have a disheveled family life, that their relatives were toxic and they had to try to figure out how to get away from them and grow beyond those difficulties. They didn't have abusive relationships in the past that could have affected the way that they interact with each other.
And they went and messed it up.
Their communicative environment was optimal because they weren't tainted with the bad experiences that many of us have had. Some have processed through and some haven't. So the issue becomes, if they didn't have dysfunctional parents, they didn't have an upheaved family life, they didn't have abusive relationships in their past, there's still the possibility that a miscommunication could have happened between them, simply because one person may have said something that the other person didn't understand what the intention of it was. That is a fact of the way that language works. That's an objective thing. It only gets more complicated when we have to open it up to considerations of how dysfunctional parents and upheaval in the family life and abusive relationships can factor into what one could perceive. But even without those things, you can say something to someone just because if they don't understand it, there's a miscommunication there. That doesn't necessarily mean for that miscommunication that all of those other factors had a root in it.
So question before you move on. So with that being said, And you can tell me if you're going to get to this. Why is it so hard for someone to say, "Hey, did you mean this that way?" And if you didn't, could you explain it to me?
One of the reasons that some people have difficulty with that question is that it has to come from a place of humility. You have to understand and admit to that person that something they said was hurtful to you, something they said came across negatively, it wasn't positive, and you have all of these feelings about that you're not sure they're going to validate. So that's
Ah,
when you don't want to say anything.
okay.
That's one of the reasons it's very difficult for people to say that simple statement that you said this, it came off a certain way. Is that what you meant? That seems simple enough, but you really have an internal struggle to deal with when you have to present that question to someone. The other reason people might have a difficulty with that question is that they feel like they know the other person so well that even if they present the question humbly, that person is still going to have a negative reaction to it.
Okay. And I've been there.
And,
Yeah.
and keeping down those arguments is one of the reasons that some people don't follow through with that simple question. We cover that in the book just a little bit, but it's in future chapters.
Yeah. Okay. And I get it because again, that's pretty much I do that better now in this relationship, but that was one of my issues because I was too busy worried about how that person was going to respond if I said I just didn't get what you said or what you said hurt me, and knowing I've may have said it before, but the reaction that they gave me, I didn't want to feel that hurt again, so I just let it go, and then that still made it worse.
hmm those things we have our steps in working through in our individual experiences, but they do impact the communication process, absolutely. And as we were talking about the communication process, so many people don't know what communication really is in general. They think they know, but there are things that they obviously miss from it. Simplest form possible. Communication is trying to let someone know what you're thinking about, trying to tell someone what you're thinking. That is what communication is. Thus, if the person to whom you're speaking does not know what you're thinking, you have not communicated.
Okay.
Some people feel that once they speak, that constitutes communication, and that's enough. That once they've said it, and that is not true,
Mm.
because the core of communication is trying to let someone know what you're thinking and what's on your mind. If they walk away without knowing what's on your mind, you have not communicated. Whether you spoke it, whether you've written a letter, if it was a text message like we were talking about earlier,
Yeah.
communication is inherently inclusive of comprehension. It's not just talking, it's not just delivering the message that you think that you deliver because you said so. It's almost like if I write a letter and I want you to get it, but I don't put it in an envelope, I don't put it in the mailbox, I don't let the post office carry it to your house, you never get it, and you don't read it. Why do I get to say that I've communicated to you what I'm thinking when none of those steps have actually taken place in
Happen.
order
Yeah.
for you to understand? And of course, that was an old analogy for the letters. But the point is, communication is that whole journey, that process, that jaunt where you let someone know what you're thinking. If they don't come away knowing what you were thinking because you have spoken it, then you have not communicated.
Yeah. That's something, man. I think that's like something that's being done worldwide, especially throughout all this the anger that people have towards each other
Yes.
and the miscommunication, and then folks just getting angry and just killing folks. Brian commented earlier. to what basically something that you were stating, pride.
Yes,
Uh,
that makes it difficult to ask the question and to say, I heard what you said, but I'm not sure if it came across the way you meant it.
Ms. Quay says, a very good breakdown, what you just basically stated. Then Brian also added, people who are the senders have to learn how to communicate with the receiver in the way that the receiver will receive the message.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That takes us right into our next point. Consider your hearer. You have to be deliberate about the way that you're saying what you're saying in order for the person who's hearing to receive what you're saying. That was Brian's statement exactly.
Yeah. You know what? That goes back to before we started when I was saying the analogy of about the kids. You know, one kid is smarter than the other, and you know you have that first kid that was born was extremely smart, and you have the second kid isn't smarter than the first, but you implement the same teaching on that the less smart child, and you have some parents that are calling their child dumb because they're not sitting and trying to understand the hearer of the the problem solving that they're trying to give this person. And I'm pretty sure this child is many kids are saying, I just don't get it. And
Mhm.
instead of trying to figure out a better way that that person hears it so that they can understand, so that they can get it, we just still push it through, and they better get it type thing.
Yeah. And unfortunately, a lot of adults talk to each other that way as well. There
Yes,
are people
yes.
who would say, I said what I said. And that means you better have understood, because if you don't, what you misunderstand is not my responsibility. And that is erroneous. One of the things that we already know that we can do to improve our communicative ability, we already naturally do it when we're talking with children and pets. Exactly what you said about the way that people learn differently. You also recognize that as an adult, there are things that you say to a child that you wouldn't say to another adult. There are
Yes.
things, the ways that you talk to your pet that you wouldn't necessarily talk to the grocery store clerk, you know,
Yeah.
because let's say, how great would it be for every person who has a pet to say, hey, doggy, stop tinkling in the house, go outside and come back in when you finish. Nobody does that because they recognize the pet is not going to understand that point.
You shouldn't, but unfortunately, uh, people do that now. It's sad, but okay, go ahead.
So, in this exercise of considering your hearer and practicing curtailing the way you deliver your message as best receivable by the hearer, we already do it in some capacity. We just need to do it more often. And there's no way to say that doing this is coddling someone or making things babyfied for them, because if you consider two professional adults, a doctor and an electrician, both of them are competent, both of them are successful, both of them are professional, but they speak different languages because of the different work that they do. Neither of them is prepared to be told that they're ignorant or that they're stupid, because obviously they aren't. So when you're curtailing what you're saying for the best receipt of the person, you're not condescending on them. You're not belittling them in any way. You're not exerting a position of superiority for yourself over them the way that one might imply with pets and children. It doesn't work that way when you're dealing with an adult. It's just the matter of making sure that what you say is best designed for the receiver to hear it.
Okay.
And
So, Brian, oh well, no, that's the other. Quay says the love language or family learning or personal style.
yes,
Uh, Lisa says everyone has different ways of learning and seeing or understanding the same piece of information.
that's exactly right. And those are some of the factors that have to come into consideration when we're dealing with considering your hearer and making sure that what you say is going to be best suited for their reception. We also talk about your audience. When you speak, to whom are you speaking? When you say something, who do you want that message to be delivered to? Talking to yourself has one application in many ways. People just assert that as thinking out loud, but that isn't what I'm talking about. I'm talking about asking yourself questions and taking an assessment of where you are at any given moment, how you feel, what you're thinking, what do you need to do next. Like when you're talking with that person who doesn't recognize that what they've said is harmful to you.
Mm-hmm.
In that moment, you're asking yourself, why do I feel like, why have I responded to this person's words the way that I have? And then you go through that whole process in your mind to try to figure that answer out. So in those questions, when you're taking a self-assessment, you are your own audience to make sure that you have a grasp of what's going on in your mind before you structure it to present it to someone else. Also, as an audience, God. There's a long story about this, but the short version of it is that God is actually a member of your audience. Every time you pray, you are intending that he hears you.
Mm-hmm.
The still small voice is the way that we generally perceive his response back to us. And there's another story that I could illustrate that with, but just very shortly, what the still small voice sounds like, in my estimation, is simply a recognition. It is something you instantly become aware of that you didn't know you thought before. It is simply a revelation. I don't preach that for doctrine. That's not a part of anybody's church tenet, but it's just what I've seen and the experiences that I've had and the conversations that I've had with many people who are practicing Christians. And that's one of the ways that it's summarized. But
Okay.
all of those things make God your audience if you're praying, and you become God's audience if he's talking back to you. But some people don't want to try to talk to God because they're intimidated and they feel like if they don't have the proper order of words, that they won't get a prayer through, it won't be accepted, and things of that sort. Your prayers don't need a preamble like the Constitution. You've heard people pray that it's just so structured, and it begins to feel like unless you do that way, that God won't hear you. And that isn't true. You can start a conversation with God as simply as you start any other conversation. Hi, hello, this thing happened. It's
Yeah.
really very simple. But for audience premises, those issues deal with God as your audience. And we had a talking points activity on page 32. I don't know if you got here or have done that yet, but we'll
No,
save
no,
that.
no. Haven't gotten that far yet. No.
We'll save that for the people when they pick up their copies of it.
Yeah. Lisa says that ask and know before you deliver,
Mhm.
and Mr. Tony said one must be cognizant of the audience and how constant the message is.
Yes,
And she also stated that you cannot explain yourself unless you know what you're explaining.
yes, and that is a very important point as well. And that was the point we were focusing on when you yourself are your audience, when you are asking yourself questions that help you perceive where you are in that conversational process. Now, all of these things tie back to the communication process because they are your inherent experience. These are things that we deal with as human beings in this time and place in Earth history that we are now, that Adam and Eve did not have to deal with. Because
Yep.
when they were made, they were grown people right away. They didn't have the dysfunctional histories, they didn't have the dysfunctional backgrounds. So we're dealing with those things that they never did. Hindrances to communication are, there are only two types. They're internal, the things that you have going on in your experience that prevent the current notion from being received, and
Mhm.
there are external hindrances. anything actually going on in the physical room where you are. Most times, internal hindrances to communication are more problematic than anything that's physically going on. Because really, if you're having a conversation with someone and the room is noisy, you can simply step to the other room and resolve that distraction. But
Yeah, you
if
can't run from yourself.
that is true, that is absolutely true. And if you also have the conversation that you're having with another person, if it's impeded because when you look at that person, you see your abusive father, that's a bigger deal than
Mm,
leaving a room. So we deal
mm.
with only these two types of distractions when we're handling situations where we're trying to communicate with someone and the message is not being delivered.
Hey,
And
so before you go to the next part, so you say about the father situation. So do you think you can use that analogy as well as how a lot of people looking at their kids that are so many forms and fashions similar to them, and there's like facing themselves and because I don't know, I and it's just my opinion, and I could be seeing it wrong, but I see a lot of people push away their kids that kind of remind them of themselves. And it may be like the part of them that they haven't faced or that trauma that they haven't conquered or walked through or fixed.
mhm, anything that reminds a person of internal work that they have to do can become an obstacle to their
Mm,
growth and to their process. It doesn't matter if it's a parent, it doesn't matter if it's a child, it doesn't matter if it's a coworker. Even if this is unfortunate, but even if they look at themselves in the mirror, what they see back could be an obstacle if
mm,
they were abused in such a way that the abuser continually told them that they were ugly and continually told them that they weren't attractive. If they continue to hear that, whatever they see when they look in the mirror will become an obstacle. That is an internal situation for them to need to resolve as they're moving forward with their their person in their relationship. So yes, to your question very easily, there are things that people can see in their children that are reflections of their parents' treatment and can be off-putting in their maturation process. That is absolutely true.
I can actually add to what you just said before I read what Brian's saying is that for years my grandma used to call me dumb. And it started off because I didn't sweep like how she thought I should have swept. And her thing was, your mom and teach you how to sweep, dumb, 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 dumb. And for me, it was like, it's my grandma, so my grandma must know. And that just sunk in and it stuck. And even though for years, like at the beginning of school, I was like AB honor roll, I literally start taking on that persona and like literally became dumb. It's I can laugh at it now, but back then it was like wow, I really am. But it took me unfortunately to become an adult to realize that that was just something that shouldn't have been said to a person that supposedly was supposed to love and care for you. I shouldn't have took it to heart, but I was a child, so
Exactly.
didn't know.
Exactly. Exactly. You are correct that that shouldn't have been said, and that is a full stop statement. Whether or not you love the person, whatever your relationship to them is, all of that is not the is that isn't the conditional point. You should not tell someone they are dumb. Full stop. That's a full stop situation. And when you've heard that, and when people have heard abusive things from those they love, the person to whom they're speaking in that moment, who is not that abuser, might be dealing with trying to get past the the misconstructed images that that person now bears as a result of that abuse.
Yeah.
That means that if, let's take me for example, if I was with someone who was very mean and then that relationship is over, now I'm with someone else. Whatever little thing that this new person might do that bears the slightest resemblance to the old person
Kind of like
becomes
triggers.
a barrier that the new person has to deal with me as I'm growing through it, because that is an internal thing. That is an internal distraction. You can't walk away from that as simply as leaving a room if it's too noisy. And these are the types of things that impede the communication process.
Okay.
Another thing,
Oh, okay. Go ahead. Go ahead. And then I'll read what Brian said.
okay, another thing that impedes the communication process is when people live in a society that is piping through and streaming all kinds of different messages to them. So far, we've dealt with individuals in their individual lives and their individual circumstances, and how those lives and circumstances could impede the communication process because of what damage might have been done by the things and abuses in their life. But now, add to the mix, there's an outside environment that's imposing upon those people as they try their broken efforts to communicate with each other. These are the things that people aren't really recognizing have as big an impact on their communicative exchanges as they really do. And one of the illustrations that I want to do is called the personhood illustration. We look at things that we've heard from other people, things that they've said, things we've seen on TV, and they always have the authority. But we know who they are. They are your mothers, your brothers, cousins, fathers, family, sisters, co-workers from TV, music shows. Everything in your environment has the potential to affect the way that you think and behave. This is true when you're dealing with internal things, as well as when you're dealing with those larger concepts of the environment that you're physically in, while your internal struggles are being hammered out. Anything that you remember, that you've seen or heard, that you don't know where it came from, they said it.
Yeah.
And let me show you who they are. It's very simple. The things that society says people should do, the things that society says people shouldn't do, the ways that society says men should behave versus the ways that society say women should behave. Your fathers, your mothers, your brothers, your sisters, cousins, teachers, co-workers, all of those people make up society as a whole. So now you're dealing with the impressions of your childhood, things that happened when you were little, potential abuses, on top of being in an environment that imposes upon you its own set of values. These are two elements of the toxic environment that people are constantly in while they're trying to communicate to someone. These are the barriers that they have to try to overcome to try and get to that place where the most optimal communicative exchange is possible. The way that it was with Adam and Eve. Because Adam and Eve didn't have abusive parents. They didn't have a toxic background to fight against when they're listening to somebody. We're trying to get back to our own place of where our past does not impact the way that we hear things that are said to us and the way that we say things back. That's the object of my book, because it deals with these issues and it explains them in ways that capitalize on the simple things that we already know to do that we just haven't done often enough.
And so and with that, I I find it, talking to a lot of people that refuse. and they know that that's an issue, and they refuse to address it, but they won't change. They want that peace that you're referring to, but they're not taking the necessary steps in order to get that peace.
Mhm. Mhm. One of the reasons that they might do that, we talked about a little bit earlier, is that they haven't. I think this is what Brian was talking about when he referred to pride, when he dealt with the issue that admitting that something someone
Yes.
said wounded you
Mm-hmm.
and presenting it to them in the manner of that injury. Some people don't want to do that because they're prideful. They don't want to
Yeah.
admit that they've been wounded. They don't want to admit that they've been hurt. Again, you also figure that people who believe that they know enough and that what they've been able to accomplish with what they know is enough, so they don't bother trying to improve anything because they feel like where they are is satisfying. But then that gets back to the point that we mentioned a moment ago, that eventually what they think they know is not going to be enough because it won't satiate that desire for connection that their broken communication efforts continue to imbibe. There's a
So
on this.
before you go on with that, Brian says people who have different fields of experience have miscommunication issue as well because it allows too much noise to distort the message. It allows the internal things to become even bigger factor. Um,
I'm going to ask a very serious but silly question. Do you still have your physical copy of the book, or did you give it to Brian?
no, I still got it. You try to figure out if Brian got your book. No,
What?
no,
This is the second
Brian
time.
cannot have my book.
This is a
No,
perfect segue.
it is mine. But he also states, hurt people. That's why she called me dumb. Basically, internally, we are internal that we don't use abuse abusive terms like that with our children. With I'm glad, Brian, that you don't. As Lisa said, what people think of what you people what people think of what you have to say. It makes it hard to express your true emotions and feelings because they might not like it or think that you are soft, crazy, or do not know what you're talking about.
Yes.
And Mr. Tony says intelligent. Indeed, pride is why a lot of us don't want to be honest. Pride is why many, especially men, do not open up to fear of it being used against us. I got mine too. So yeah, but Brian does not have my book. No, I'm not sharing.
Right now is the point where I will get into the part of the communication process that I actually feel is very fun. I love to do this.
Okay, let's go.
This is a physical representation of the communication process. Everybody says that communication is a process. I am going to illustrate that process and show you exactly the components they're involved. Okay, so we're dealing with, of course, we have a man and a woman. Once the guy says something, his words are received into the ears of the woman, and they have to go through her processes that include her upbringing, her past situations, stereotypes that she might believe,
Mm,
whether or not she's matured past those things, and even things that may have happened that morning before she can produce a response and generate it back for him to consider. Now, when he hears her response, he has to take it through the same processes before he can return an answer to her. But if he doesn't understand something, it's not just an answer, it's the question. If she doesn't understand why he has a question because she felt that what she said was clear enough, she asks him a question about why he doesn't understand. So now when he answers that question and responds, she understands where he was, presenting her position in a way that he can filter it in with what his question was. And then we have understanding. That is
We
of
there's
how
a the church that I attend, that thing is kind of like what they call fair fight, and we we call a fair fight, and so you present to the person what you need to present to them, and they speak it back to you so that they can make sure that they understand, and then they do the same thing, and then it's easier for, and because I like how you just saying a lot of people speak and the other person is not understood, or they may not try to even understand before they just react and to it just explode. So
exactly, exactly. And those are the things that obviously will complicate the communication process. But when people talk about a communication process, this is what they mean. When a person speaks, when the hearer takes it and they take those words through their own filters and their own experience and everything that happened that day, and they produce a response back. That response has been given back, now has to go through the hearer's filters, and that happens until they understand each other. That is the communication process. Now, this example started with a man speaking to a woman, but
mhm.
the fact is, the same thing holds true if a woman initiates the conversation. He has to hear what she said and take it through all of his processes before he can generate an answer. Then she hears his answer and takes it back through her processes. And then they continue forward with the question and answer process until they understand what each person has actually said. This is the communication process. Now, mind you, watch this. We're just dealing with these two people. We
Mhm.
have the man and the woman, his experience and her experience. What happens when you add another component to this? We have the same man and the same woman who's ever starting the conversation. We look through their process as it
Okay.
was with their own dysfunctions, their own maturity issues, and then we add to that a society that
Ah,
is telling them that men and women should do certain things, they shouldn't do these things, this is how this is supposed to be, and that's not how this is supposed to be, and anything you do outside that parameter, you are ostracized for. Be
man,
yourself, but not too loudly.
that
If
society
you
look like
don't
Kevin
think you
Samuels.
to be valuable, but buy everything anyway. All of those ways society gets into the middle of that communication process as a third party, physically third party in the interactions between this man and this woman when they're already dealing with their own issues.
Yeah.
Some processed, some not. It really is a miracle sometimes that people are, when people get to the point where they hear what a person said and they can enjoy the conversation, and that's all, and it's just that simple.
It is, and it is so weird. And me and Lisa, I enjoy our conversations, and so it's not that I didn't enjoy conversations with people prior. It's just the fact that having someone taking the time to try to understand where you're coming from, and then me doing it and vice versa as well, makes the conversation even more intimate, I
Absolutely,
feel.
absolutely, and you are absolutely right. See, that intimacy is what people are looking for, but they can't find it when they haven't taken the time to consider what each of their filters means and how each of their filters factors into how they interact with other people. And to be frank, these kinds of conversations can't happen in 140 characters.
Hmm.
You're not going to get this much substance when everything is microwave society. And that's what's going to bring people to that culmination where they're overwhelmed, where they feel hopeless, and they have all of these different anxieties about situations that they have within their own ability to control and mitigate, but they won't. Some people won't because they don't know how. This is their answer. That is a point blank statement. Some people won't because of pride, as we talked about also. But that's a separate issue that they will eventually have to come to their own resolutions about if they ever want to grow forward out of those traumas. Now, with all that being said, let me tie this back to the original premise. We've explored the communication process from the individual's perspective. We've explored the communication process from society having its own impositions on those people who are trying. Now, what is a miscommunication? Starting from where we began, a miscommunication very simply is any or all of these factors as a whole or in part combination with every person's experience that renders their understanding of something someone said incorrect. That's what a miscommunication is. It is a monkey wrench in that process. When you presume that each person has done the work to get themselves back to that state where they can communicate in their most optimal levels, like they've processed through the dysfunction, they've processed through the abuse, they've processed through the mislabelings, they've processed through all of the mistreatment that they may have grown up through and have recognized this is over here. These things may not be what this person who's talking to me now has anything to do with. If they have put themselves as far as possible in that Adam and Eve situation where they're not tainted by the past dysfunction, a miscommunication between those two types of people is simply this, what we're talking about here. Something was said that the other person didn't intend, or something was received that the other person was not trying to intend.
So it's kind of like one of those things where uh when you have the woman asking a man to do something, and when she leaves and she comes back and it's not done, or it's not done correctly because it's not done how she think it should be done correctly, and she didn't take the time to say, baby, so do you kind of understand where how I would like for this to look?
One of the ways that situations like that often become a seed which germinates into resent unto that person is that people take for granted that the person to whom they're speaking knows everything that they themselves know. If I ask you to go to the store and get me a broom, I'm assuming that you know the kind of broom that I want. So when you bring me back one of the handheld brooms, when I needed a big push broom for the driveway, I'm angry at you because you didn't do what I asked.
Okay,
If
so with
I
that being said,
knew that you knew the same thing that I knew, I would not have said that to you.
okay, so with that being said, I listen, and it's so funny because I listen to my mom and my dad go through the same thing. And my mom surprisingly understands this about my dad. So my mom will write a list and say, "Hey, so I got this list. Do you mind coming here so I can explain it to you?" Ah, girl, I know. I already know. You ain't got to read it to me. He takes the list, goes to the store, then comes back without what he was supposed to bring back, or it's something similar to what the list said, but not the exact thing. And
Absolutely.
so now the animosity is towards my mom because my mom was like, I tried to explain it to you, but you didn't want to listen.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And those types of things have to be stopped in our own experience
Mm,
to prevent miscommunication with other people. And that's one of the other things. I'm going to say this specifically about my book right now. A lot of things that are geared toward communication and relationships, they're pitched toward women as if women are supposed to do all the work to make a relationship happen and functional. This book is designed for men to have to read too, because men grew up with backgrounds that influence how they think. Men grew up with certain stereotypes that impact what they think is right and what they think is wrong. Every person has to take this inventory of themselves and make sure that when they are trying to communicate, they are moving from the most optimal position of sharing a thought that is possible under the circumstances. And again,
mm.
this type of substance you're not going to get in 140 characters. You can't uh, synthesize the work that needs to be done to get people to the place where they're able to have these kinds of dialogues with themselves and with others for the growth of that interaction.
Tony said it best. Emotional labor goes both ways. So I hate
Yeah.
to hear a man sit up and say a woman need to know her place and she need to sit down, and the man ain't is emotionally connected to himself. And thank you, Tony.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And as we began speaking about communication, we've come full circle with not only what communication is, but how miscommunications occur, how they can be resolved, and what the optimal communicating environment would look like. Does anyone have any questions over the things that we've covered so far?
Yeah, we have a couple of minutes, guys. So if you do have a question, we'll try and answer as many as we can before we end this lovely show that Miss Evelyn debunked and unloaded for us. Great information. If you know anyone that may need this information about miscommunication, because there's a lot of y'all out there that need some communication about miscommunication. is um I I was like anticipating and that book there, the love language was
Hmm.
like one of my great reads as well. Um
Yes. We'll be giving a presentation on the five love languages this coming weekend.
you can actually, we don't have a question yet, so you can actually explain it. So
Oh, wonderful. Okay. Well, many people are familiar with the concept of the five love languages, but for a very quick preview of this weekend's presentation, we're going to deal with what they are, how they function, and what the maximum benefit of knowing your significant other's love language will yield to your relationship.
okay. Well, we do have one question. Tony says, okay, to the author of Truth Speak, have you seen communications properly executed by a disciple of your book?
Yes, Tony, thank you for that question. A friend of mine was one of the people who bought one of the first copies, and she told me that after discussing the material inside with her boyfriend at the time, it enabled their relationship to become stronger. And they then were able to identify relationship areas in their relationship that weren't getting the attention that they should have been getting when they thought everything was okay, but continued to run into a problem. So absolutely, I have seen people who have benefited from it. I've seen people who have said back to me, this is great, I wish I'd had this a long time ago. But the specific testimony that I shared was one that was related to me from my earliest days in 2017, I think, when she bought the copies from me.
Well, Tony, I'm here to vouch that I just started reading the book, but I've had her on the show a couple of times, and I'm pretty sure some of the stuff that she was preaching basically stemmed off the book, and it's great information. So, and a lot of you guys don't know, but for you guys that are watching or may watch later, we're gonna visit her book after every chapter that me and my fiance read. We're gonna go bring her back on, and she's going to go through possibly maybe another PowerPoint or whatnot of that chapter, because I wanted to bring this to the sofa after going to her book club. I We missed like the very first part of it. We were able to catch some parts of it, but I wanted to bring it to the sofa because, like I stated throughout the show tonight, and she stated how we say something to someone else, regardless if it's a friend, a lover, family member, co-worker. We say it to them with the understanding of they should already know what I'm saying to them.
Right.
And that's not true. And for me, I think that's the reason for everyone being so sensitive now. Everybody is so freaking sensitive, where you can say bye wrong and they just automatically just go off the hinges. Oh, that's how you gonna say bye to me? It's just it's ridiculous. So I hope you guys continue to watch the other episodes. Actually share this. And like I said at the very beginning, the Soul for Real Talk is first episode will be next Wednesday, where we're going to kind of be talking about how the different dynamics of how society is telling the woman to treat a man and how a man should treat a woman. And I'll be the first to say it if no one else has said it. A lot of it hogwash. Is I
Agreed.
the ideal of head of house is so wrong. The society has built up man, and I mean man, not man and woman, just singly man, as to be this inferior person, and that everyone should bow down to particular men, not all men. And that's the other thing. It's not that it's saying society is saying all men should be bowed down to. It's particular men. And if you don't have this status, if you're not in this quota, then you're not that person that you should be bowed down to. And I'm tired of it. And so this season is really going to be about really getting deep into sensitive things that people are scared to talk about. And I really could care less how people feel, the attacks, because there's going to be some titles of these episodes that are probably going to make people cringe or make people look at me sideways. And I'm up for the challenge. I'm just tired. So.
Well, I look forward to the times where I will be back. It is always a pleasure to speak
Yes,
with
ma'am.
you and field the questions from our viewers. Of course, if you have any questions, you can definitely reach out and keep in contact for other events that are coming up. I'll definitely be back here on some more shows and we'll move through the book as they're moving through, talking about these various issues. And I can't state enough in echo of what you just said about how important it is to deal with issues that people don't necessarily want to because they're sensitive. But it's those issues that are the causative factors in most of the problems that people have. So as long as we continue going around treating symptoms the core issues won't be addressed. And as we get into those core issues, the hope is that people will hear what we're saying, grow in their own ways, and embrace these things to put them in the position to optimally communicate.
I like that. Core is just like you can sit up here like with my multiple sclerosis. I can sit up here and go to the doctor and get pills for all my symptoms. But if I really don't go to the core of my illness and try and handle that situation, I'm just gonna be constantly be prescribed drugs, and that doesn't help. But guys, in the description is her website so that you can go get this book and so that you can be just like me and have this lovely information on hand because, like I said, Brian cannot have my book. And Brian did state earlier that he did communication. So that's why he was able to talk like he had written your book already. But the Quay says, please post the link to the Zoom in the comments. I'm hoping I have calendar room to join. So yes, if you can type that in the comment at any time, Evelyn, I totally appreciate it.
Okay.
But guys, with that being said, we're 6 minutes over. We totally appreciate it. And again, I will be probably posting the poster for next Wednesday, probably this weekend. And if you want to catch our part one of next week's show, you have to join our podcast. We actually do our podcast a couple of ways. Our podcast is you can find it on it's the sofa. I'm typing it in. The sofa pillow talk. Me and my fiance. It's on all podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We're working on Pandora, but iHeartRadio, Google as well. But you also have where if you're on Instagram, we do a behind the scenes while we're recording it on Mr. and Mrs. Take Over the World on IG and TikTok. So anybody on IG and TikTok, you can find us there. And we do it on Saturday night. So that's when we record the podcast, but the podcast posts every Wednesday morning. So with that being said, Miss Evelyn, I do appreciate you again. Love you always coming on with the great information, the gems.
Thank you. Thank you. It is
No
always a pleasure.
And so with that being said, guys, we appreciate it. You have a great night.